Dear participants, we have our next keynote speaker, Mr. Neaz, Chief Executive Officer, National Communication Network, Guyana. Neaz has over 35 years in the field of theatre and filmmaking as an actor, director, producer, and writer. He has written number of full-length and short plays and won Best Playwright in 2013 for his play, When Chocolate Melts, which dealt with aspects of social ills of domestic violence. He has acted in many local Guyanese films and is listed on the International Movie Database site IMDb. Just here, he produced and directed the movie I Am Us, which was screened at the Caribbean cinemas with free admissions. That movie, which was also a stage play, focused on the inherent challenges of the historical racial division that plague election periods in Guyana. We welcome you, sir. Today, he's going to present on the topic, Emotion is Translation, Neuroscience, and Mental Health. The stage is yours, sir.
Well, it's good morning here in Guyana. So good morning and good evening. I believe it's in India at this time. My apologies for the brief late start, but I was in. I don't know what went wrong. The way you described me somehow may not necessarily qualify me to speak on this topic because I'm more into television and theater and so on. So I guess because of my personal experiences and the fact that I would have penned them in a book may have somehow create the opportunity for me to maybe say something on this topic, not necessarily the entire topic, but maybe aspects of it. So I hope that what I say will be in keeping with what you're trying to do and the efforts that you're putting in to bring awareness across the globe. So let me commend you and all the organizers and all those who are participating in being involved in all of this. I welcome these initiatives and I'm grateful for the opportunities to be able to share my thoughts as it relates to my own experiences. In terms of emotions, and to use my own COVID experience as a guide, I spent 50 days in the COVID ICU. I think I'm the person with the longest stay in Guyana in the ICU since COVID would have hit us in March of 2020. I don't think that's an enviable record that anyone would want to envy me for that. But in terms of emotions within that context, within that entire period that I spent there is a heightening, of course, of emotions and senses, more especially fear of death, to be put it bluntly. There's a lot of uncertainty as to whether you will survive, whether you'll come out alive. And that was impacted negatively in the context that I would have seen about 12 persons dying around me during that period. So with every death, those emotions were heightened. And the fear, of course, increased exponentially with every other death. Of course, there was sadness, and sadness in the sense that you yearn for your family and loved ones. You yearn for freedom. I recall on a few occasions, there was a bird that will come by the window, just doing its thing and pecking at the glass. At some other point in my life, I would have seen that as a distraction. I would have seen that something that was disturbing me, disturbing my own peace. But somehow I yearned to be like that bird, hoping for an opportunity that I could be outside like that bird and be pecking at other things. That was very draining. It was extremely draining. It was extremely painful. And we always have this debate as to whether physical pain is more intense or you feel it more than emotional pain. I'm not an expert to speak on that, but I can tell you that the pain that I personally went through was unbearable. I I prayed and I prayed, and I think many persons, if not all, who were in a situation like that, and those who are still in, would be doing that. And somehow to get the strength was not an easy thing. And I coined the phrase, I had to get strength. I had to find strength to get strength. I had to find strength to get strength, to be able to carry me through that period. And you had to pull on all your reserves, all of the things that that you believe that you can hold on to give you some semblance of hope, that hopefully that will be the straw that you're clutching on, that can carry you through. I'm thankful that I did made it through. I made it through. I'm very thankful for that. But I don't think I have been able to divorce myself from the trauma of those emotional roller coaster, well, that emotional roller coaster, the impact of seeing death around me, the sounds of people breathing their last, the trolleys moving the dead bodies out. When I hear similar songs like that, even 2 years after, just about 2 years after, it triggers a lot of things in me. My anxiety, I get very anxious, and I get worried too. But having said all of that, how do we go beyond that isolation in the context of how do we make a better future, given the impact of not just the pandemic, but the general impact of mental health? Now, I'm no expert in mental health. I didn't want to write a book, but during the time when I was getting help, and I was forced to be helped, I tried to hide it. I used all my acting expertise, whatever limited expertise I may have, to hide it from people. I think I did a very good job for about 4 years, 4.5 years thereabout, to hide it from people, hide it from my family, from my wife, my children, my colleagues at work. And that was also extremely painful. Pardon me. To hold a smile, to distract people, to not attract attention to yourself, was even more painful. And it was another actor, a good friend of mine, who saw through my facade and questioned me on many occasions. And eventually I gave in and I said, yes, I'm having challenges, and I got help. And during the period of getting help, I was asked what are my hobbies, and one of them I mentioned is writing. And the doctor said, okay, why don't you just write your experiences just for therapy? I did it. And then someone read it and said, well, this thing can be turned into a book. And I fought that. I said, no, I'm not going to do that. This is my personal experience. But I was convinced in the context that given what I do here in Guyana, people felt that someone like me coming out and speak about mental health, speak about the impact, could be able to help others, empower others. And it was that reason alone that I decided to have my personal story within the public domain. I'm very happy that so many people who would have read the book would have reached out to me, and whatever help it could have been, I'm happy that my experience can help them. But how do we create an environment whereby people do not necessarily have to depend on a book solely for the purpose of getting help? The book should be another something to read, as you build your library. In my humble view, how do we get to that point? And to use our country as an example, our society as an example, our country is currently under the phase of transformational development. But in terms of our mindset, general mindset, we are still a conservative nation. We are a diverse country of diverse ethnicity, but general and very religious oriented country as well. Hinduism, Islam, and Christianity are the three dominant ones. But we are very conservative, to the point that whereby many things are taboo, becomes taboo. So when the phrase mental health is used by anyone generally across the country, the worst impressions come to mind. So people will feel, well, you have to be placed into an institution, a mental institution. And we do have that here in Ghana. We do have mental institution here in Ghana. So the address of that is very well known. So people will just call the address and say you need to be there. And that has been it for my entire life. And when that happens, and it continues to happen, people are now in a state of uncertainty. What do they do? Because now, if they were to come out and talk about it, one, they can be discriminated against, they can be stigmatized. That will heighten all of their emotions, create fear, worry, everything else. And that has its own impact. And then there could be isolation. People may not necessarily want to work with you. You possibly could lose your job, not only here in Guyana, but in some other parts of the world. And then when you don't have generally the kind of mechanism to sustain interventions, that also creates uncertainty. So if I'm going to come out, then how do I get help? Who is there to help me? And can people really understand that I may have issues that are within the realms of mental health, but I'm not crazy. I haven't lost my marbles. I don't know if people take time, if they would have the time to differentiate between that, because the phrase mental health just throw all of that upon you or upon others just like that. And then there's the pressure of family too. Because of our conservativeness here in Guyana, in some families, certain things family may not necessarily, some family that is, may not necessarily want to have to deal with that and may want to push it aside. That in itself could also help to isolate people, even in their own homes, where the help should actually be. So it creates a serious, it creates a conundrum as to how people can truly, and I'm talking in a general sense. There have been people there are people who came out, spoke out, and tried to see what they can do to help influence change. And that is what I want to touch on: change as we go into the future. How do we make a better future within this context? And for me, first of all, we have to understand the impact of the stigma. It's a very big thing, and what is driving the stigma, and hopefully that educational interventions can be made to help mitigate that. We are now living in a very evolving world in terms of how information is presented, how information is received or should be received, to be able to have the message, the impact of the message in a positive way. That all of that has to be taken into consideration. But I strongly believe that there's a lot of awareness that needs to be done, not just for the sake of awareness, but targeted awareness to be able to help educate. And if people are educated, I believe that in itself can help to change perception. And if the perception is changed, then hopefully we will be in a very good place. So for me, I want to start there to help break that stigma, because the more you break the stigma, I will want to believe almost similarly, you are empowering people to come forward and to seek help. And the more people are coming forward, especially within the villages and so on, they can help to break that mindset, that belief. Because when your villager is coming out and more of them are coming out, eventually I would want to believe, I'm very optimistic that that can help to break that cycle. Importantly, too, there has to be policies, um, you know, to be able to help all of that. So you must be able to have, well, when I talk about policies, I'm talking about within the work environment, within the schools. I did a lecture at a local university here, and I was amazed at the amount of young people that, first of all, attended, and two, raised serious concerns about mental health, some admitting that they were impacted by it. So this is not something that has an age barrier to it. This is not something that has an ethnic barrier to it, or a religious barrier, or a financial barrier to it. This is something that affects people across the spectrums, or the various spectrum. And policies in terms of how we deal with that, what mechanism do we have in place to be able, one, to spot or accurately spot or try to spot persons who may be showing tendencies or symptoms of that. Mind you, it can be very misleading, like what I did for 4.5 years. I don't think anyone could have picked it up. And I think people who know me, many people who know me, were extremely surprised. And there was a common outcry, Neaz, we never knew. And maybe that was my choice. I didn't want anyone to know. So that in itself could create its own problems. But I still believe that we may be able to have some kind of a policy. Let's say a child who is exposed to domestic violence at home, the parents, and is seeing that, traumatized, can't deal with that, come to school, more than likely that child will not be in a position to act to focus the way that you would expect them to. I would want to believe that, pardon me, there might be some noticeable signs, and for those signs to be taken seriously, spot them first of all, take them seriously. But then what do you do after that? What mechanism do you do? So I want to believe that policies, I mean, this is just a short presentation, so I can't go into all the details. So policies will have to be across the board, work environment, organizations, and everything else, because that's psychological trauma. And again, based on my own experience, I would not want anyone to experience that. I would want people to be able to get help. But then again, I think it's tied to the policies. And of course, policies will be able to make available necessary resources. So resources are key. All of them, right? The financial resources, the creative resources, the human resources, to be able to have a more holistic and sustained approach to, first of all, create the mechanism, and then to instill a sense of confidence in people who may be showing signs at different stages, for them to want to come forward and be able to know that in confidence, first of all, they have confidence to come forward, and two, that their discussions are confidential, and that's only between who they're speaking with. So you're talking here about trained people and the physical mechanism, if possible, and of course, all of that will cost the money. For the school systems, you may want to have assigned, or you want to call them monitors, whatever name you want to give them, to be able to spot, work with children, create mechanisms in schools, to be able to ensure that the environment that children are exposed to. I mean, we've heard a lot about bullyism, and we have seen deadly impact of that, unfortunately, in some countries. And how do you deal with that? How do you mitigate that, while at the same time ensuring that there's equality in terms of how children are treated in the school? Now, I know it's not easy. I can sit here and talk till next year. I know it's not easy. But somehow, I believe when you have policies that can be enforced, given the fact that you have adequate resources, I think that can go a very, very far way, because you have a loss of creativity too when these things are happening in our young minds. They're losing creative hours. They're unwilling to get involved in social activities. So their whole life, I mean, the related experts can tell you about what that can lead to. Because they'll want to avoid people, especially if they, in the context of bullyism and all of that. So for me, when I look at all of this, while I may not be able to speak definitively or in any way as an expert on transnational neuroscience on all of that, I can speak based on my experience on what I would like to see in the future, to make that future more accommodating, if I can use that term, more welcoming, so that we can be able to let our people know that we have their backs, so to speak. They're not alone. It's confidential, and mental health, from what I'm learning and what I would have read, we can overcome this. We can overcome this together. We hold each other hands and go forward. And for me, if we can get along that path, not only here in Guyana, but I'm very optimistic that with the kind of development that we're seeing in our country and the kind of interventions that I've already seen, I haven't spoken to officials here, I'm in a much more comfortable place in my mindset in terms of what is now available and what other mechanisms will become available as we go forward. I'm very, very confident that of all of those coming into place within the near future. So I'm hoping that my short presentation here would first of all be able to fit in. It fits in with your objective and be able to maybe put a different perspective because I didn't listen to the entire conference. I also here taking up with another conference here in Guyana, unfortunately. Um, and this somehow can be useful to what is it that you're trying to do. So I would want to maybe stop there. And if there's any question, clarification, I'm willing to accommodate.
Thank you so
Hello?
much. Thank you so much, Mr. Neaz. That was an awesome presentation.
Thank you. Thank you.
I request the participants, if you have any queries or questions to Mr. Neaz, you can post it in the QA session. We have one question for you, Mr. Neaz. What are the major drivers of mental health issues in Guyana? Is the socio-political environment contributing to the mental health issue in Guyana?
Well, generally in every country, the social environment will drive some of that because we still have a large section of the population across the world that may not necessarily be earning um, at the desired levels. And that in itself has its own impact, family. So let's, for example, take a father who, a small family, he has to provide X amount to ensure that he meets all of his financial commitments to the home. But for some reason, he's not at X. He cannot get to X, right? So right away, that in itself affects him. And when he has to go home, and the family now know that something has to be given up for whatever reason, that also could have. So I think that's a that's a universal issue. So in terms of that I believe that is common. And Ghana is no different. But you have other issues too. And I touched on one of them of domestic violence, right? There is the single parent phenomenon, where a mother or a father has to be the one doing everything. That also, while some parents may want to shield their children from the impact, as the child grows, the child is seeing all of that. And that there's also the potential there for some kind of an impact. I hope it will not be severe, but it could be because a child may see exactly what a mother and father is or father is doing and can feel a sense of burden, that he and she's doing all of this to me. That in turn can also. Then of course there's lack of opportunities depending on what it is. Whether you're in school and you can't make the cricket team or the basketball team for whatever reason, and you think that you're good enough, all of those factors can not necessarily combine. Some can be combined, but I believe they're all contributing factors.
Thank you so much. So there's one more question. Is your book online?
Yes, it is. The Kindle version is on both Amazon and Borders, I think. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Participants, if you have any other queries, you can post it in the QA session. We have one more question. Is this topic related to mental health or so? The topic was emotion and translation, neuroscience and mental health beyond isolation, anxiety, and entitlement. How to create a better future.
Right. So I'm aware of the topic. I'm trying to figure out what the question is in relation to the topic.
Daisy, I guess. Daisy, you have any queries to Mr. Neaz? We can unmute so that you can talk or ask. We have one more question. How to diagnose long COVID without mixing up with other disease?
That is one I'm trying to find some answers myself. And it makes it worse that I'm not a doctor. because I believe, unfortunately, I'm one of those persons that is suffering from long COVID. There are times when I'm confused too as to whether I'm having just a flu or a cold or whatever the case may be. And then, given my experience in the ICU, you can imagine my state of mind when those things happen. But I would want to leave that to the medical doctors to offer their opinions.
Thank you so much. I request you to put your email address on the chat box, Mr. Neaz, so that if any participants have any queries, they can directly contact you.
Feel free, feel free. I'll be happy to do whatever I can. Feel free. And I want to thank you again and your team for affording me this opportunity to share my story.
And personally, from my side, I would love to watch one of your movies.
Thank you. Thank you again for the opportunity. And I wish you and everyone else all the best.